Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Arizona International Film Festival. This is our 30th event. It's a big one, and we've got a big program for you this afternoon with Panavision. As we all know, first of all, my name is John Mason. I'm the Director of Special Projects at the festival. It gives me great pleasure to host this session. And the best pleasure is that I'm going to have very little to say. And our guests are going to do the heavy lifting. And you are in for a treat, ladies and gentlemen, with what these folks have to say about what they do and the world of motion picture production. This is, as I say, Panavision. We have three distinguished gentlemen. They are going to introduce themselves. They all have slide programs that they will screen share with us. We're going to start out with Aaron, and he will pass it off to his colleagues. At the end of the session, with the three presentations, we will open up the program to question and answer from the Zoom audience. And if those of you who are watching have questions, please go to your chat at the bottom of the screen and type those in, and we will get to as many as we can. Last year, the session with Panavision, we had to stop it. We just had we did not answer all the questions. We just ran out of time. It was very popular, and I'm anticipating the same reaction. So again, I want to get us going right away. This is a conversation with Panavision. Panavision's the world's leading camera and lens manufacturer for professional motion pictures. They've been doing this for a long time, and they've got a lot to share with us today. So it gives me great pleasure to turn the microphone and the baton over to Aaron Saffa with Panavision. Aaron.
Thanks very much, John. I appreciate it. I'm just going to jump right in and share my screen so I can let everyone know why I'm here and not take up too much time as well. All right. I'm assuming everyone's seeing this. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, good. So as this slide will indicate, I am the manager of the new Filmmaker program. And for those of you that are not familiar, I just wanted to take a couple of minutes at the top of the program here to tell you a little bit about the NFP, what we do, and then I'm going to hand it over to people who have a lot more interesting and educational information. But essentially, the new Filmmaker program is the umbrella under which Panavision offers outreach and access and support, as you see here, to the community of aspiring filmmakers. That obviously is students and schools and training programs, but definitely also, of course, the community of independent aspiring filmmakers, like hopefully many of you in the audience are as well. So we do this in a few different ways. Obviously, educational resources like this, seminars, in pre-COVID and at some point ever hope to be post-COVID days, we do on-site tours, demos, hands-on trainings, all those kinds of things. And then, of course, we have, as some of you may be familiar, the NFP grant program. And that's what I want to talk about just a little bit if you're not familiar with it. So for over 25 years, Panavision has been loaning professional camera packages like this one here. This is our flagship DXL2 camera, and this is our DXL-M modular system built on a red weapon. But we've been loaning camera packages like this to schools, training programs, and definitely, as I said, to independent aspiring filmmakers in particular. Anyone can apply for this grant, the equipment grant, and we do receive many more applications than we're able to accept, unfortunately, but it is our hope and goal to support as many up and coming filmmakers as possible. And we have been able to help, happily, hundreds of films over the years, like all of these. And to answer the question that comes up, yes, Napoleon Dynamite was a NFP grant, as was Requiem for a Dream, and these and many other awesome, amazing films. And I can be honest about what this is about for us. The reason I have a job and get paid a salary, because from a strictly business perspective, Panavision wants to build a relationship with you all now while you're getting started. Even if you don't think that maybe you have a budget to work with Panavision, we want this to be your open door and your bridge into Panavision, so that when you have your $100 million from Netflix, you're very comfortable working with us and bringing all that money to us. So I hope that everyone out there will apply for the grant. And when you do, just a couple of quick notes about things to keep in mind and how to do it. So first of all, is your production ready? We all know that making independent cinema is extremely hard. And so I come from a career as a producer. And the way I look at this program and the way that we run it is, it's not so much to me about, do I think your script is great or you have a great film, because opinions change and opinions vary. And there are many, many different totally valid artistic perspectives. What we really want to see is, do you have things lined up? Do you have your ducks in a row so that you're going to get to the finish line? Because a lot of independent cinema, as we all know, despite the best intentions, don't necessarily make it to that finish line. So we want to make sure that you have everything set up. You need to apply a minimum of 2 months prior to your first locked shoot date. The next thing to think about is insurance. It's really the same as the first one, but I mention it separately because it's such a common stumbling block. It is a necessary evil in our business, sadly. And then the more fun part, which is, what are your camera system needs, right? I love that we can help save people money and a line item. Like I said, I used to be a producer and I know camera as a line item, but the reality is that if you're going to be getting some of the greatest lenses and camera systems in the world, I want to see, have you thought out, how that's going to help to elevate your film and help you achieve your creative goals. And if, by the way, you don't necessarily know which camera and lenses you want to use, and you come to us and say, I've really thought about the look, my DP and I have talked, or maybe you're the DP and I've talked to my director and this is what we're going for, here are our references, we'd love to have that conversation. I would certainly love to have that conversation. That's oftentimes when I will go to someone like Guy, who you're going to hear from soon, and I will have that conversation with Guy and bring him in. So when you're ready and you have these conversations, this is the place to go. This website here, there are actually 2 different websites. But then most importantly is this email right here. That's the most important thing I can tell you all day, because that is, like I said, that's your open door to Panavision. Please email us, whether it's about the grant or not. You can email us with any questions you have about Panavision. And like I said, whether or not we're able to give you free camera equipment, I want to start a conversation and a relationship with you, and that's why we're here. So that's about it, but I do want to talk about Light Iron really quickly, because we are going to hear from Paul as well. And this relates to the new Filmmaker program. So in 2015, Panavision acquired post-production and digital innovation company Light Iron. I'll let Paul tell you all about it. But basically, in forming this partnership, I think it's safe to say Panavision was recognizing a fundamental truth about modern filmmaking, which is that imaging and post-production is all one long process now. So bringing Light Iron to the fold allowed us as Panavision and the Panavision family of companies to support filmmakers throughout that image chain. And so I'm very happy to say that now that this is the case for Panavision, that Light Iron is also part of the new Filmmaker program. So that's why Paul's here. We do educational presentations and, again, seminars and events and tours when COVID allows again. And in addition, as of last year, we launched the new Filmmaker program post-production grant as well. So this grant covers finishing and color. Paul can tell you more about what they do. The one thing I will just say about this grant is that while the equipment grant, we can accept applications for features and long form projects, the post-production grant is really only appropriate for short films, because we're really talking about actual studio hours that bill out at, I think, starting like $500 an hour. So, when we're talking about giving a grant, it's a much bigger ask when we're talking about actual studio hours. So we have to cap it at an amount that is really more reasonable for short films. So Panavision is a family of companies. I know I'm going very fast. Sorry, I want to hand this off to Paul and to Guy, but I'll just point out that ultimately the new Filmmaker program hopes to continue to expand and provide greater access throughout the Panavision family of brands. So if you have questions on any of these companies that are part of Panavision, we're happy to help. Like I said, it's nfp@panavision.com. And I'm always happy to chat with anyone about it. So I don't know if, John, if I'm taking a couple questions, if there are any about the NFP now, or should I wait till the end?
I think we can wait till the end,
Okay.
Aaron.
Cool. Awesome. Well, that's my little song and dance about the new Filmmaker program. I hope to hear from all of you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to hand it off to Paul over at Light Iron. All right.
Thank you, Aaron. I had all sorts of great stuff to lined up to say, but Aaron's already said it all, so I'm just going to hand it off to Guy, and away we go. I wish that were true, but it isn't, because I'm in post-production, so I like to use words and talk a lot to confuse you. All right. So again, my name is Paul Geffre. In this iteration of my time at Light Iron, I'm the VP of Business Development. In my first iteration at Light Iron, I was one of the co-founders along with Michael Cioni, Peter Cioni, and Katie Fallion, who's still my partner today. So as Aaron alluded to, in 2015, we sold our little company to Panavision, mostly because from the very beginning of Light Iron, we recognized that post-production starts in pre-production. It starts before sometimes you even lock sets, right? Post-production really begins like when you first start thinking about exactly how you're going to make your vision come to life. I'm a little ahead of myself, so I'm going to go to my next slide, which is basically Light Iron is a post-production company. We do dailies, we do finishing. We don't do sound, we don't do visual effects.
Don't mean to interrupt, but I'm not seeing your slides. I don't know if anybody else is not seeing your slides. I'm sorry to interrupt. But
oh no, thank you.
Have you shared your screen?
Yeah, I thought I had. Let me see.
I don't see them either, Paul.
There you go.
There we go.
There we go.
There we go.
Now
There
we
we
got
go.
it.
There, that's it. Awesome.
Let me back up.
There we go.
I'll just restart completely. No, I'm just kidding. So there's the first one. Little bit about Light Iron post-production dailies. We've got offices in all of the major North American film hubs from Vancouver to Atlanta. We have our coloring facilities in Los Angeles and New York. Those are our two main offices where we do color correction and finishing. But we can do dailies pretty much all over the world because we have a system called Outpost, which is a mobile daily system, which we had to create when we started Light Iron because we didn't have enough space to actually do dailies because we had like one room. And so we had to try to figure out how to do all of this stuff outside of the office. So, you know, in terms of how we process dailies at the beginning, we could do them in facility, we can do them remotely. And then we can also do them remotely with a person who's not actually in the remote location. So we have several different ways in which we can do dailies. Being part of the Panavision family is enormously beneficial because it also gives us offices all over the world in which we can work and do things if need be. And it's just great to be involved with such an amazing variety of companies. So as I started talking about, because I got ahead of myself, what I'm really going to talk about today, I'll just call it the post-production roadmap. It's a 75,000-foot view of how we do things. But the most important thing, like I mentioned very early on, is that post actually starts at the very beginning of your process. And if you're not thinking about how you're finishing and where your project is going to go at the beginning, you're either going to spend too much money, you're not going to budget enough money, or you're just going to end up with something that's thrown together and that's how it's going to look at the end of the day. And that's not how anybody wants to see their final project. So obviously the first place we start in prep, right? And, you know, forever prep was always like, let's get the script ready, let's break it down, let's do all of those things. But I would argue that the most important question is, where is our movie going at the end of the day? And it is very important for you as filmmakers, and I can say this because I have also been a filmmaker, to be realistic about exactly what you're making. Because if you've got $500,000, you're probably not going to make a movie that's going to go be seen on 6,000 screens throughout the world in perpetuity. Maybe you do, and if you do, please bring it to Light Iron because I'm happy to do that one for free. But the chances are good that you're going to be going some other route than massive theatrical. It's probably going to go to some over-the-top streaming service. And so there are considerations, there are things to consider about how you're going to do things based on where it's going to go. So just a couple examples of if it's going to go theatrical, if it's going to go over the top. And ultimately, where you think your project is going to end up is going to determine what you test with Guy at the very beginning of the process, right? Are you going to shoot DXL2? Are you going to shoot Alexa Mini? Are you going to shoot iPhone? Please don't. You know, what are you going to do? Are you going to shoot anamorphic? Is there a reason to? Can you get by with spherical, which is going to save you a lot of money? So again, all of these sort of determinations on where you're going to end up are going to determine what you're looking at the very beginning of the project. And being realistic about it allows me to say, hey, listen, based on the hundreds of shows that we've worked on, this is a great path that's going to get you to where you're going and is going to cost you the least amount of money. And obviously we're in business to make money, but honestly, with the amount of independent films that we have done over the years, what I found is like, it's what's best for the project, right? And everybody working on the show should be in the same thing. So, you know, I can tell you like, listen, yes, we can do this and I can charge you this much money and we can do all of this work. But if you just do this, you don't have to pay me this. And I'm actually okay with that because at the end of the day, you're going to appreciate that. And I'm going to get something that I can work with that's going to be correct, that is, you know, hasn't cost you $10,000 extra dollars, and that you can put on the screen. And that's the most important part. So again, you know, prep for us, consists of a certain number size. Like I mentioned, is it going to be DXL2? Is it going to be LX Mini? Is it going to be HVX 200? Whatever the format is going to determine what the resolution is. For example, if you're planning to do a 2K theatrical finish, maybe you don't shoot 4K. Shoot 4K. But if you're going to go over the top to like Netflix or Amazon or Hulu, you're required to acquire in at least 4K. And a lot of times, depending on your project, it makes sense to oversample. So you shoot 8K because you can bring that down to 4K, and it gives the image certain qualities and certain looks that you may not have been able to get before. So there's a lot of things that go into it, you know, HDR and dynamic range and lens choices and everything else. There's a ton of things to think about. It all starts at the end of the process. Okay, back at it. So, you know, the first thing we talk about when we talk about dailies is what is our color pipeline? And I'm not going to get too deep in the weeds with this. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. Generally on a small show, on set, you're backing everything up and pretty much that's it. It's going to get processed somewhere else. The most efficient, easy way to do it is to apply a LUT and kick out dailies to, you know, to Final Cut or to Avid or to Premiere or whatever the editorial software is. That's the simplest way to do it. For most people, it's fine. Some people have a DIT on set, looks on set. That's great too. We will take those CDLs, which are called color decision lists, and we'll apply those to the dailies. You know, and that allows us a little more freedom in terms of, oh, we got to bring this down. This was too cool. Those kinds of decisions can be made on set and then applied after the fact. The most expensive way to do it is to do what's called best light dailies, which is where we actually have a physical human colorist sit down and actually color correct all of your dailies. So they're all unique and all individual. And that's wonderful and amazing and great. You might have the most beautiful looking offline in the world, but good luck replicating that when you go to visual effects, because they don't have all the tools that it takes to be able to make it look like you remember it looking, which is where we come in. And we can tell you like, hey, if you got a visual effects heavy show, this is a much better way to do it, because ultimately like everything's going to look the same throughout the pipeline. And then when we get it in finishing, we can make it look like whatever we want it to look like. So that's just kind of a little bit of an overview of dailies and like how the color pipeline works. And so now, of course, we've got all that sorted out. You've got lenses, you got cameras, you got everything else we're going to shoot it. So what are the things to consider then? Well, logistic daily data and of course dailies all come into play again, because really what you're looking at is, okay, logistically, where am I? Am I in Atlanta? Because then I can do dailies at Light Iron Atlanta and I'm good, or I can go here or there. I have resources. Am I in a field in Indiana? Because if that's the case, you know, there are other things to consider. We're doing a project right now that's shot in Thailand, which was amazing for them. However, there was no crew, there was nobody in Thailand. They had to fly everybody in. There were no locals. So everybody had to be housed, everybody had to be fed. So you would ask, well, why do they do that? Well, because the executive producer is from Thailand, and so that's where the money comes from, right? So then you make that of like, of course, we're going to shoot in Thailand and house everybody. That's no problem. So logistically, like, what are you looking at? Because everything has a cost and benefit, right? And so depending on where you are, things are going to be more or less expensive, and maybe less expensive because you're in a tax qualified state, you know, like New Mexico or maybe Arizona.
No,
I'll let nope. Okay, never mind then. Not Arizona, but any of the other tax advantage locations.
Unfortunately.
Yes. All right. Well, again, at least I didn't speak out of turn. Might actually save you money in the long run. We talked very briefly about resolution, and this is just kind of a screen grab from a project that we worked on, where it was shot on a DXL2. They windowed it down to 7K for the majority of the shoot, and then used 5K when they did some throwback 35 material. I mention this because at 8K, you're looking at about a terabyte an hour, right? But by going down to 7K, they cut that data rate down to about 600 gigabytes an hour, which is 40% less. So you need 40% less disk space, you need 40% less LTO. That is a significant savings, and the amount of pixels that you lose for them was completely acceptable. And I would argue that for a lot of people, like, you know, yeah, you can shoot full 8K, window it down to 7K, can you visually see a difference? Is there a difference? Yes, technically we all know that all the nerds that make numbers and like percentages, of course there's a difference. Can you perceive it? And you know, a lot of that will also go into, do you shoot raw or do you shoot ProRes if your camera is capable of doing that? I would say test, put the images up side by side and see if you can tell a difference, because I will tell you this, we've done this test 1,000 times. People sit down in there, you're like, okay, this is on the left, ProRes on the left, say, raw is on the right. They sit down 3 minutes into it, they're like, so ProRes is on the right? And you're like, nope, raw still on the right, ProRes still on the left, not changing. 3 minutes later, they'll ask the same question. So as you do these things and as you create things and as you make your films, don't think that bigger is always better. Sometimes it is, but sometimes you can achieve the same creative looks and goals by using something that's a lot simpler and a lot less expensive. All right, so back off my soapbox again. We're talking about digital dailies, talking about media management, color, transport. Like I said, if you shoot a smaller file size, you know, these things are all less. I will say in general, good rules of thumb to work by is always have 3 copies of your media. Whether that's 3 copies on spinning disk or 1 copy on spinning disk and 2 copies on LTO, always have a triplicate copy. That is a very much a best practice thing, because I cannot tell you how many times something goes wrong. And we're talking about your negative, which if we were shooting 35mm film, you would take that can, you would put the can in the vault and you would keep it at the right temperature. You would do everything you can to protect it. The digital files are exactly the same. We still call them OCN, or original camera negative. So just think about that as you're working through things. Color, like I mentioned, can be done on set. It can be done in post. There's lots of different ways to skin that cat, again, depending on the needs of the project. All right, so we've shot something, we ingest it, we back it up 3 times, we take the audio, we sync it up, we throw some color on it, and then we make DNX 36 for Avid, or we make ProRes movies for Apple or Final Cut or Premiere. Lots of different things you can do in terms of file format for your dailies. And then we back everything up to LTO. Today, LTO 7 is the standard. I would argue that by the end of the year, it'll probably be LTO 8, which is all great because every iteration you are able to store more stuff on each tape, which brings the cost down because you need less actual physical media. So yeah, so that's and always make 2 LTOs. So 1 LTO copy, 1 LTO master, 1 copy just in case. All right, so we kind of talked about this a little bit, but you know, when you capture using basically any camera body that Panavision offers, you're probably going to be capturing some flavor of log, whether it's, you know, Arri log C or, you know, light iron log, whatever it is in the DXL. It's light iron color, but it's not actually light iron log. I forget what it is. But it's going to end up looking like this. And so, like I mentioned, we apply the CDL, which is the color decision list that came from set. We apply the LUT, which is essentially just a window through which you're viewing the raw data so that it looks correct on whatever monitor you're looking at. But then at the end of the day, it looks correct. So, right, we kind of start here and then we add a couple of things and it looks correct and it's very workable. We don't do this much. We do have editorial suites in New York, but we don't do a lot of editorial. So, you know, I'm just going to briefly say, hey, you cut your movie, whether it's somebody sitting in an office in New York at Light Iron or whether it's somebody sitting in their living room in their underwear, however you cut your movie, like you get that done. The most important thing is that as you go, there's not any changing of the metadata underneath everything we're working on. And what I mean by that is if you have a clip called 1, and then we make a daily from that called 1, you don't go changing this file underneath to 2 because all of that'll mess up all of the stuff down the road and make your online and conform very confusing. So once everything is cut and you have it all in a timeline, you basically export an EDL or an XML. We take that in at Light Iron and that refers back to the original camera negative. So even though you're cutting at HD DNX 36, we still have those big 8K files that you captured on the DXL2. And when we go to conform, we go back to that, we take all that data and we put it, we basically put it in the editorial timeline, and that's what you work on for the final process. You know, and then at the end of the day, we put up some preview screenings and you let audiences go gaga over it, which is what we like to do. All right. So again, I know I'm going 1,000 miles an hour, and I apologize for that. Happy to take any questions you might have at the end of the day. But we've prepped it. We have cameras. We went out. We shot it. We cut it. Everything's done. Sound is with sound. We don't do sound. Visual effects are happening somewhere else. And now it's time to finish the movie. And so Light Iron is essentially the last repository of all of the elements that it's going to take to finish your film. So that's all the camera negative, it's all the final audio, it's all of the visual effects, it's score and titles and credits and everything else that goes to make the project finish. That's what we take. We throw all of that together, and that's what's called the conform process. Once upon a time, it was called online editing. It's still kind of a combination of both. Online being like the master format that you're mastering in. And then we take all of that, and we have a very talented artist in a very dark room sit and press a bunch of buttons and spin a bunch of wheels and make things beautiful. I'm probably biased because I work in color correction and have for a long time, but it is one of the most interesting parts of the process, other than being on set, because that has its own lore and its own thing about it. But when you get to the end and you've worked so hard, and then you look at your project on the final monitor, and the colorist presses a button and it snaps in, it's a little bit of magic, right? Because finally, like, all of that work and all those hours that you put in, you're finally seeing the final result, and that's a very exciting process. So color is sort of the second step of that process. Deliverables, obviously, if you sell your project to Netflix, budget a lot because they need a lot of things. And I can kind of go through a few of what those are. And then of course, archiving again, because just like we did at the beginning, we want to back up everything that we make at the end. I touched on it a little bit. Conform is basically just taking what the project was from editorial, putting it all together and making it look nice. That's a little example of what an EDL and a timeline would look like. Again, color part of the process. That's our colorist Corinne Bogdanovich. Corinne, incidentally, her first job at Light Iron was color correcting the movie that I produced. So Corinne and I go way back to the very early days of Light Iron. But essentially, like, how long does this stuff take? Well, if you have a standard episodic 1 hour show, lately this has been going up. So I would argue that 1 hour episodics probably start around 24 hours. I worked on a very big DI called The Book of Boba Fett, and they spent over 100 hours an episode on that show, and that show was like 35 minutes. So you can spend a lot of time doing this. On the feature side, generally a 90-minute film is usually broken into 5 reels, right? Reels are about 20 minutes a piece. We can usually do about a reel a day. So for a 100-minute movie, it'd be 5 days, and you kind of go from there. But usually around a week of sitting in a dark room and looking at your movie, getting more excited every minute. Deliverables wise, like I mentioned, back in the old days, we used to make tapes. Thanks to the tsunami in Japan, we stopped doing that, and everything is pretty much digitally delivered these days. But you need to know things like IMFs, which are interchangeable media formats or mastering formats, depending on where you look. DCPs, digital cinema packages, QuickTime movies, all of those acronyms are what keep me in business. So I'm not going to tell you what all of them mean, but you're probably going to have to make some flavor of them. So just know that the deliverables process can be a big one. So yeah, just a little bit of an example of what you're making. DSMs are files, tapes, NAM, non-graded masters. Like, there's all sorts of deliverables questions that come up depending on where you're going. And this is all something that we can also tell you about and say, hey, listen, yes, if you make this, then you can derive this, this, and this from it. We don't actually have to charge you for it. There's all sorts of different ways we can skin this, but there's a lot to make at the end of the process. Are you as tired of hearing me talk as I am? You have to be by now. But the good news is we're just about done. And that's, just reiterating that where you end up should inform everything you do before you start shooting a frame. And the nice thing about Panavision and Light Iron is that you can go to Guy and you can ask him questions about cameras and lenses, and you can go to the marketing team at Panavision and they can answer all of those questions. And those decisions you can ask us, like, hey, if I go this route, what am I looking at for this, this, and this? And it's all one big family. So we can sort of tell you everything that you're going to need to know from before you shoot it till the time you send it off to Amazon or Netflix or whatever distribution company you manage to find. So yeah, so that's pretty much it. I actually didn't put that quote in there, so I don't know what it says, but you know, it's post shouldn't be a scary place, I guess, is what the end of the deal is. And you know, we're here for you to answer any questions and to make sure that we get you off on the right foot. Yeah, my name is Paul Geffre. I'm in business development. Please don't hold that against me. And now I will turn it over to Guy McVicker, who is going to walk you through all things Panavision. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Hello, everybody. Can you guys hear me all right?
Yes, indeed, Guy.
All right. Well, my name is Guy McVicker. I'm Director of Technical Marketing for Panavision. What does it mean? It means that I get to play with everything that we have under the roof here. Cameras, lenses, focus assist, accessories, camera arrays, all that fun stuff. And it's my role and my team's role to support the world. So our role is to educate and train both clients and Panavision employees around the world as to what exists, what is new, how things work together, and everything in between. And it's quite a lot of fun. My background is actually electronics, but I'll tell you a secret, I really don't like electronics. So while electronics got me in the door, if I'd never seen an oscilloscope for the rest of my life, I'll be a very happy man. But very quickly, long story short, there were two crazy old guys that worked in lenses that were giving the prep techs a hard time. And they kept sticking all the camera techs in there, like to get in a lens tech, and they all ran screaming from the crazy old dudes. And so they're like, let's put the new guy in there. Well, I was the new guy, managed to get along with the crazy old dudes, and eventually they left, and then we took over the department, changing. So my background is the strongest in lenses. Been working on lenses for 26 years. I quickly moved into film camera, never left lenses, but kind of got into film cameras, did that for many, many years, then digital and technical marketing. So I've had the pleasure of hands-on repair with most of the mechanical and digital items in the building, and it helps me do my job, and I like it. I spend a lot of my time working with cinematographers, both emerging, established, and A-listers, helping you hone the look for your project. The camera to choose based on requirements, and the look, lenses to choose, and so on. So we're going to do a really truncated version of what I usually do in person, but I usually have a camera and a lens or lenses, and we talk about this stuff live. So like Paul, I'm going to be as swift as possible. Feel free to screenshot anything you see here today. There's a few more slides than I had intended, but I think I can get through them pretty quickly. If you don't catch, I'm going to talk a lot about aberrations and crop factors and all that stuff. If you didn't catch it the first time, don't kill yourself, because I'm going to keep repeating the same things over and over as they pertain to different lenses and different cameras, different formats. So hopefully by the end, you'll all be experts in aberration detection and a few other things. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen successfully. Okay, there we go. Can everybody see this?
Yes.
Okay, so let me just get into presentation mode. Okay, so once again, we're going to start off talking about formats. So formats has been around for, obviously, since the inception of film, and every format serves a purpose. Every format also has a different magnification. So in short, 16 millimeter is roughly half the size of a 35 millimeter negative. 35 millimeter negative is roughly half the size of a 5x 65 millimeter camera negative. And IMAX is 3 times the size of the 5x 65 millimeter negative, because it is a 15x horizontal negative. Actually exceeds more than 3 times, so it's gigantic. It's essentially the size of like your iPhone, or a pack of cigarettes. It's quite large. In digital, 2/3 inch is kind of for the most part on the wayside, but the Alexa reared its head about a decade or so ago, kind of changed the rules and the laws of motion picture. Their timing was excellent with all the strikes and so forth, and SAG and AFTRA. And so now we have digital. Film is not dead. We are doing more film this year in the US of A than we have done in over a decade. And our European offices have never really slowed down with film. Most of the major motion pictures, a lot of the major motion pictures you see are still today captured on film. Spherical versus anamorphic. So we're going to talk a little bit about this. And anamorphic comes in various squeezes and covers various formats. But traditionally, anamorphic in the Panavision world was a 2x squeeze. So on the left side, we have a traditional spherical format off of a 4-perf camera negative. And if you were shooting 240 or 239, you would be extracting that frame from a 4-perf camera negative. Or if you want to save some money, you could extract the exact same frame from a 3-perf camera negative. The 4-perf frame you see on the left is identical in size to a 2.8K extraction from an Alexa in 4.3. Now on the right, it's the same frame, same height by width, but anamorphic was designed to utilize the largest portion of the 35mm 4-perf negative. Now, it wasn't about aesthetics back then. It was about an inexpensive way to have the same magnification as 65mm. So 65mm and 35mm, 2x anamorphic, have the same circle of confusion, which means they have the same depth of field for any given focal length, and they have the same magnification, because anamorphic 2x is squeezing twice as much information into that image area. And so a 50mm lens has roughly a 25mm field of view. If you put a 50mm lens on a 5-perf 65mm, guess what? You have a 25mm field of view, but you have 50mm magnification, and that is the big selling point, which we're going to continue to elaborate as we go. So here's some examples. So why would you want to shoot large format over Super 35? Why Super 35 over 16? There's many reasons, but what the common denominator is magnification. The more magnification you have, the more separation you get in the foreground and the background, the more it feels like a first-person perspective. So if you're trying to create or manifest a first-person perspective, the best way to do it is spherically in 65mm 5-perf. That replicates the human eye and the human perspective perfectly. Large format came to play because of the streaming, providers that Paul mentioned. So the streaming providers, well, actually Netflix, started requiring high resolution capture. They wanted 4K, 4K, 4K. And they're so picky about it that everybody just kind of follows what Netflix does. When Netflix makes a new rule, everyone goes, yep, that works for me. And they kind of fall in suit. So because of 4K, there were certain cameras you couldn't use because they didn't deliver or capture a 4K negative. Alexa was one of them. Everybody loves the Alexa. Everybody couldn't wait to shoot the Alexa, and Netflix and Amazon were like, yeah, sorry, I don't think so. That's this. No, you got to shoot Sony. You got to shoot Red. You got to shoot Panavision. You got to shoot this. You got to shoot Panasonic. And if you've ever shot on the Vericam, you're probably really glad that there's now other systems to shoot with for episodics. Great system, but very vivid. So the DXL, for instance, right here. So this is large format. So the same scene with the same young lady. Now we go to Super 35. Things start to get a little flatter. The background doesn't feel quite as much separation. Things kind of feel further away. And then we go to a 16mm frame. Depth of field is much more forgiving. The shape of her face is changing. Everything feels more flat. The depth of field is not nearly as shallow. So cascade back up, Super 35, large format, and then back down again. So large format has become a big deal because large format, Venice, Alexa, DXL, and Raptor, for instance, they're getting you very close to the magnification of 65mm. So if you have a magnification scale here and say 65 is over here at what you're hoping for, and you have Super 35 over here is what we've been shooting for years and years and years. If you shoot LF or Venice, you get to halfway to the magnification of a 65mm spherical frame. If you shoot DXL, Monstro, or Raptor, you get almost 75% of the way to 65mm magnification. Now, large format cameras are cheaper, smaller, faster, lighter, higher frame rates. The lenses you can use go from about 4 or 5 sets in our inventory to about 25 sets in our inventory. And then if you really want to use something that doesn't cover, we're probably going to figure out a way to slice and dice and chop up and make it cover for you. So that brings me to lenses. So lenses, every lens tells its own story. Panavision has 23 proprietary spherical optics, and we have, sorry, we have 24 proprietary optics. We have 12 to 13 spherical, and we have 12 anamorphic, and we are in the process right now of building the 13th version of anamorphic, and there are 3 more versions coming in 2023. That's just what we carry that's Panavision that nobody else can carry. We also carry everything else everybody else has. So we carry master primes and Cooks and Leicas and lights lenses and all various things are all around the world. So we have a rather large inventory of optics, and we pull upon all of them. I'm going to do a little introduction to aberration diagnosis. And the reason I do that is because lens aberrations are flaws. And what attracts us to a lens is either the absence of those flaws or the presence of those flaws. And there are certain flaws that signify like a certain genre or era. And there are 3 particular flaws that we as humans love to be photographed with. Now, the first is spherical aberration. The second is astigmatism. And the third is eluding my very busy brain for the moment. I'm sorry. Spherical aberration is, think of like if your specular highlights, instead of them being sharp and crisp, they're going to have a soft glow around them. Now, the softer the glow, the softer the skin. The spherical aberration has a nice way of helping the light wrap around the face and show the contours of the face, but hide the fine detail. Astigmatism we'll talk about a little bit more in just a minute. Field illumination is the loss of light from the center of the frame to the edge of the frame. So we call the center of the frame on axis because it's on axis with the center of the lens. Field illumination is a trick that we use quite a bit. Like you would think that most cinematographers want to have an even illumination from edge to edge. Commonly, that's not the case. In post, it's common for people to put up a vignette or a shading in the corners to darken them just to add texture. We can do that in the camera with the lens, and doing that also affects your bokeh, which we'll talk about later. Failing glare. Failing glare is a fancy word for how much, what happens when you blast a bunch of light down the barrel of your lens. How does it hold up? Does it keep your blacks rich? Do your blacks wash out? Is it a subtle washout, or is it really aggressive? Lens flares kind of speak for themselves. Lens flares would be the pings or the rings you get off of the reflections, and there's 2 types, which we're going to talk about in a second. Contrast is how rich is your black, how rich and how saturated are your colors. And the third is probably the one more offensive aberration, which is chromatic aberrations. Chromatic aberration is the red and green fringing you see at the edge of a high contrast subject. And it comes in 2 forms. It comes laterally this way. So if you have a pretty young lady in a black velvet dress against a white cyc and you're shooting with a vintage optic, you're going to see a green line on one side and you're going to see a magenta line on the other side. Or it comes axially, like on this axis from the camera to the subject. And if you're focused on a subject, say you have a great example is feet walking on wet cobblestone streets. So the wet cobblestones pick this stuff up and really kind of magnify for you to see. You'll have a green fringe on all those cobblestones leading up to the feet. Feet will be perfectly clean, black and white, for example. And then you have a magenta hue leading away on the cobblestones as it drifts off into infinity. And that's chromatic aberration. So we spoke about astigmatism being the second, and there actually is only 2. I said 3 because my brain's fried today. I apologize, which is why I couldn't think of it, because there aren't 2, there's 2. So astigmatism is the second aberration that we as humans loved to be photographed with. Why? Well, because astigmatism means it's muting fine detail. If any of you have glasses, and if you have astigmatism, if you take your glasses off and you rotate them, you're going to see the world mesmerized. You're going to see the world do this. It's going to breathe on a vertical and horizontal axis. That means the lens in your eye is warped a little bit. They actually are correcting your vision with a very weak anamorphic element to flatten it back out, to bring both planes of focus into focus at the same time. So think of the world as 2 focal planes, and we'll call it vertical and horizontal, for example. So if you have an astigmatism, you can't focus on both planes at the same time. You can only focus on one or the other. But the human eye doesn't do that. Like you don't go, oh, I'm just going to look at the vertical lines today. Your eye averages the 2 together. And if you have a subtle astigmatism, it's kind of like beer goggles. Everyone looks great. If you have a heavy astigmatism, it's like looking through a sheet of glass. You just kind of want to rub your eyes because you're hoping it's going to get better, but it doesn't. So you got to put your glasses on. That's a gross astigmatism. And it's a very effective tool in cinematography because in subtle doses, it can mute fine detail. And in heavy doses, it can really invoke an emotion, scene of duress, or whatever you want. And we can talk about examples if you like later. So I mentioned flare. So flare obviously speaks for itself. It's these, I can't use my mouse and be in full frame. So there's two flares. So glare is how much contrast is being washed out across the whole frame. A flare is the ping or the orb coming from the lens itself. And they come in, there's two types of flares. There's an entrance pupil flare, which is the big orb you get. That's what you see on the right side of your frame. And there's the exit pupil flare, which is what you see kind of shooting across Stephanie's face here and these blue rings. That's an exit pupil flare, which comes across in this. And those sometimes will have different colors, sometimes they'll be the same, and or we can manipulate that should you wish. As mentioned, or I didn't mention it, but I'm going to mention it now. So spherical lenses are modeled after the human eye because the human eye is a spherical lens. Now, reason that's important is up until 2000, probably 15 or so, when the Primo 70s came on the market. The Primo 70 is it's not our newest lens, but it is our sharpest lens, and it is still to this day the sharpest spherical lens on the market. Aside from that, all manufacturers, including Panavision, Zeiss, Leica, everybody, when they were making optics for film, they were always targeting the highest performance at highest resolution to extract as much detail out of film as possible. We call that high frequency. So high resolution, we refer to as high frequency. Low resolution would be low frequency. So high frequency would be like the texture of your hair, the pores on your face, the tweed on your clothing. Low frequency would be a cowboy hat, a stop sign. You know, somebody in a black and white pinstripe shirt, that's low frequency, you know, if it's a broad pinstripe. So what's different about the Primo 70 is, say, Primo, Master Prime, Summilux, all three high performance optics, they have really, really high performance at high frequency, high resolution, but really, really poor performance at low frequency. So what's out of focus is amoebous and amorphous and misshapen and hard to tell what it is. So the gentleman across the street in the cowboy hat's just a ball of mush. The stop sign at the corner is just it might as well be a gigantic rose for all you care, because it's just this red blob. The Primo 70 has the same performance for high frequency as it does for low frequency. Why do we do that? Well, we were designing lenses for large format. As mentioned earlier, large format better replicates the human perspective. So why not make a lens that replicates the way the human eye works? So the human eye, whether it's perfect or corrected, you have the same visual acuity for high frequency and low frequency. Sorry, someone's calling. And so that enables you to, and since the Primo 70s are so sharp, that doesn't mean your depth of field is bigger. Your depth of field is as shallow or shallower because it is the higher contrast, higher performance optic. What it means is your subjects in the background retain more shape. They're just as out of focus, but they retain more shape. So an example I give is if you have two shots, you know, traditional high performance optic and the Primo 70, and you have some out of focus foliage and out of focus trees. The normal lenses are like what you've seen for years and decades, but the Primo 70 is going to retain more shape in the leaves and the branches. So it'll be out of focus, but it won't be just a wall of color and light. You'll see shape in the foliage, you'll see shape in the branches and the light coming back through. It's something that in my experience, directors really seem to latch onto. So when we watch dailies on tests we shot, they always like, that's what you were talking about right there, right? And they almost always catch on to it. So it's just something fun and unique about the Primo 70. Contrast to the Primo 70 would be the H series. So the H series is a remanufactured lens from our first line of spherical optics from the late 50s. Very painterly, very different. So the misshapen bokeh you see here, that's because of the loss of field illumination. That means the exposure in the center of the frame is drastically different at the edge of the frame. Go back to the Primo 70, you see how your bokeh is perfectly round. Both these shots are wide open, but the bokeh is almost perfectly round because the Primo 70 has even field illumination, even across large format. This little guy from the 50s also covers large format. It will cover up to 5 per 55 millimeter. does not have even field illumination. So therefore it has compression in the bokeh, which is commonly referred to as the Petzval effect or the cat's eye effect. And it's a very effective tool. Cinematographers love it for specific applications and they want to omit it for other applications. If you also look at the bokeh along the top, you see a little green pinstripe on the edge? That's chromatic aberration. Most specifically, it's axial chromatic aberration because it's going on this axis between us and the camera. The H series is also plagued with a lot of spherical aberration. So Stephanie's face is very diffuse and soft and pretty. And while Stephanie's a very pretty lady, the Primo 70 is far more vivid. So you can see the texture in her skin, whereas the texture in her skin is gone in the H series. Here's a quick side-by-side. Now, this is just a quick comparison of just like a large chunk, like six of our most popular lenses. So these are, all of these lenses are Super 35 with the exception of the Primo 70 in the top left. And we have Stephanie here in focus. We have Jonathan in the background in focus. Now, the reason we do this and the reason this scene is shot, this set was put together by the collection of a lot of minds here at Panavision, and it was specifically designed to showcase lenses' strengths and weaknesses. So every single lens that we own has been photographed on this set with these two fine individuals. And anytime we get lenses in from a third-party vendor, we test the same way. We don't always have Stephanie and Jonathan, but we always send somebody out in front. Sometimes I have to stick my mug in front, which is not so much fun, but we take one for the team, right? So in the future, if we're sharing tests, you're going to see my mug in half your tests, and I apologize in advance. But so the reason for this is so the bokeh in the background tells us two things. It tells us, is there loss of field illumination? So right now, you know, if you see a round bokeh like the top left, you know that there's even field illumination. If you look at all the other ones, there's compression in the bokeh, so you know that the illumination isn't even. Now this is wide open. As soon as we put a stop on the lens, it's going to take on the shape of the iris, and you will have a symmetrical bokeh across the scene. Some vintage optics, like some of the super speeds, Panavision ultra speeds, and like Pankos, for instance, you'll have to go more than the stop below maximum aperture to get the bokeh to completely clean up. Most lenses clean up once you're once you're about a half stop below. The lamppost in the background is telling us how much spherical aberration the lens has. So spherical aberration, as we mentioned, is that softening the highlights, that blooming. The more it blooms, the prettier we all look. So if you look, there are some specific lenses that have more spherical aberration. So the bottom left and the one and the two in the middle have more spherical aberration than the other lenses do. Therefore, you're going to have a smoother, prettier skin tone. Here we have a little bit of backlight sneaking around behind Stephanie. So we're showing the flares. We're showing veiling glare. Veiling glare, again, is the loss in contrast because you're blasting light down the barrel. And now we have a full-on hit without Stephanie impeding the light. And you have a nice big bold flare for every single lens. Every lens has a signature. Every lens has a different flare. The Primo 70 on the top left is really, nice and concentrated in blue and probably has the richest black and most saturation. And you go on to the bottom right, which is the Panavision standard speed, which is the generation that we pull most of the H series from. So this is late 50s, early 60s Panavision. And it has the most veiling glare, has the most spherical aberration, and is even like a haze of atmosphere around the tweenie in the back. And that's because it's got a lot of spherical aberration. Now the weird, almost looks like the iris of the human eye. We call that the eyelash flare. So back in the day, that's actually tooling marks on the edge of the glass. When the glass was honed by the manufacturer, it's not perfect on the edge. And so when you pan off axis and the light hits the edge of the lens, it gives you this eyelash flare, which is kind of fun. So the Line Iron crew and myself and Dan Sasaki and Tommy Rose and a bunch of other crazy people here that all play with lenses and cameras and color science, we do presentations for the ASC Masterclass. And so right before the pandemic / end of the world, we were doing masterclasses for the ASC, and they would bring them into the Panavision office, and we do like a 45-minute to an hour presentation. And we did this thing called the wine list. And so there'd be 50 people sitting in the theater, and we'd be in front talking, and we would compare our lenses in what was called the wine list. So we had sharp to soft, high contrast to low contrast, and we had all the lenses lined up on a shelf. Every single person in the office would take their phone out and take a picture. So we're like, okay, well, we did something right. So for the next year, which didn't happen, at least not yet, because the next year was 2020, we said, let's make a whiskey chart. So Panavision has 23 to 24 proprietary optics. Every single optic is mapped on this chart. This chart is just showing you those 6 lenses you just saw. So we have high contrast, low contrast, soft, and sharp. We got even smarter and we added this. Wow. So now we have spherical aberration, we have curvature of field, anti-reflection, which would be, you know, the intensity of the flares, and veiling glare. Veiling glare, once again, is how much contrast you lose when you hit it with a hard backlight. Anamorphic. So anamorphic is something Panavision started with way back when. The Panavision anamorphic design allows us to omit the anamorphic mump. So back in the late 50s, Panavision designed a proprietary anamorphosis. And what it does is it keeps the anamorphic compression even across the frame. So when you pan left to right, people don't get tall and skinny. And more importantly, it makes actors and actresses not short and fat, and which none of us like, especially those of us that are on the silver screen. And anamorphic pre-Panavision did one of two things. They spaghetti westerned you out, so you're all tall and skinny. And when you pan across the frame, you went whoop in the corner, or it made you short and fat. And people didn't like that. So Panavision found a way to diminish that. And still to this day, it is a protected patent that nobody can match exactly. We over squeeze just a little bit by like 2-3%. So everyone loses about 5 pounds, which is wonderful. But on top of that, anamorphic, as I mentioned, was first conceived as like the poor man's 55mm, but it yields so many fun things that we have come to fall in love with. And a lot of the major motion pictures of our lives have been captured in Panavision anamorphic. And it's very easy to spot Panavision anamorphic because Panavision does some things very uniquely. The compression across the frame, I just mentioned, bokeh, disproportionate breathing, flare, magnification and perspective will carry across most anamorphics, and the focus roll off similar, but Panavision always does things just a little different. So bokeh, spherical bokeh has a spherical round shaped bokeh. Once you put a stop on the iris on it, it'll take on a hexagonal shape. Anamorphic has an elliptical bokeh because it's taking in twice the horizontal field of view. Disproportionate breathing. Panavision breathes vertically. Everybody else breathes horizontally, or they breathe on both axes. So once you see a focus rack in a movie, if you think the movie's anamorphic because you see elliptical highlights, watch for the first focus rack. If the frame goes, it's Panavision. We do, however, have 2 zooms that breathe horizontally, and one of our 3 sets of Ultra Panavision. Ultra Panavision is the 1.3 squeeze for large format. One set breathes horizontally, and that's because when we were doing Marvel's Endgame, they wanted less anamorphic aesthetic, and the only way to do that was to manifest it a more traditional non-Panavision way. So there's 3 sets of lenses designed and for that show that will breathe horizontally, and they have less aesthetic. They're sharper in the corners, and so on and so on. The flares. So we have the C series on top, the T in the middle, and the E at the bottom. So basically you have 1960 on the top, you have 2018 in the middle, actually up to 2020 when we stopped building them. And then we have 1985 right there at the bottom. So similar, they all have a horizontal flare. They're all going to have that blue bright thing, but they'll change. The C series always has a hint of magenta in the flare. The T series, its exit pupil will be green. And the E series is blue with like, you know, a little bit of green in it. So magnification and perspective. So as we mentioned before, the best way to replicate the human perspective is 65mm spherical. Okay, a good example is the first Iron Man, which was my first experience with 65mm. Mr. Libatique was shooting, you know, spherical 35, and he had to replicate Tony Stark's POV. So we were chatting on the phone. He's like, so I put 35 up is what a lot of cinema, 35 in Super 35, 35mm in Super 35, sorry, is what many cinematographers feel is the first person perspective. He's like, I got it on there. He's like, the field of view is right. He's like, but the depth perception sucks. He's like, everybody feels too far away from the actor's field of view. He's like, so if I shoot it in 65 with a 75, will that work? And I was like, yeah, like that's perfect. You're gonna crush it. And that's exactly what he did. So Tony Stark's POV is 75 millimeter spherical on 65 millimeter. So in the scene here, we have Primo spherical on the bottom and we have anamorphic on the top. So this gentleman, his face, the proportion, the shape of his face is actually more accurate on the top than on the bottom. The perspective of the room is more correct, and his space in the room feels more correct as well. Both get the job done, but both do it differently and both invoke a different emotion. Last would be the focus roll off. Anamorphic is this is kind of a collection of bouquet. The fact that the background's disproportionate, so it's stretched. It's just it's like I said, the 5 pillars of anamorphic. This is kind of almost a few of them combined together. So in a really weird way, the anamorphic lens is doing something the human eye can't do, because we don't see 50 mil this way, 25 this way. We see 35 millimeter everywhere. But it does a better job of replicating the first person or the human perspective than it does doing it spherically in 35. It is doing it in a way that it's, like I said, it's manifesting the human eye cannot do, but it feels more real than if you shot it spherical in Super 35. So I'm going to try to breeze through these pretty quick. So this is a still of a G series, an expanded G series. Expanded means we took a lens that was designed for 35 millimeter and we've added some additional magnification to the lens to allow it to cover large format. That right now is the hottest thing on the planet. Like, it's what we're asked to do every day. And we are commonly always running out of these optics. When you expand an anamorphic, you add additional compression to the bouquet, which means you increase the aesthetics. So you have the 2 times anamorphic aesthetic. Now you have an even stronger aesthetic, and cinematographers love it. So this is a 2006 anamorphic. Here is 1959. This is one of our oldest 2 times squeeze anamorphic lenses. There are 6 of them in the world, and they are never on the shelf. They are very, very popular, and their close focus goes down to 10 to 11 inches. This is called the Macro Auto Panatar 55 millimeter. Very, very fun, very unique lens. Now you'll notice off the street lamp in the back, you're getting a pink flare. Pink means B series. So yes, Panavision went A, B, C, D, E, skipped F, went G, F, because no one of the F series. And then we fast forwarded way ahead to the T series. They were going to call the T series the H series, believe it or not. And it's a good thing we didn't, because now we have H series optical. T series stands for a portion of the optical recipe, because we added an element in the system called a torque. And so Mr. Sasaki, who designed this set, said, hey, let's call it T series. So it's called the T series. And here's 2 side by side. So the top is, again, the G series with a nice big, bold, bright flare, rich blacks. And then you have the bottom, which is the Ultra Panatar, which is the first anamorphics we made for large format. They're 1.3 squeeze. So if you look at the bouquet at the G series, it's got more compression. It's a steeper, more abrupt ellipse, and the bottom is Ultra Panavision, which is a 1.3 squeeze. So the ellipse isn't quite as big. So this is a scene from Hateful Eight, because Ultra Panavision next to IMAX, Ultra Panavision 65 millimeter 5-perf with a 1.3 squeeze Ultra Panavision anamorphic lens on it was the greatest magnification you can get. Remember, so more magnification means the closer you're pulling your subject to the camera, you're pushing the background away, things feel visually correct. Your visual cues, your depth cues, they all feel real, like you're in the room. And this is just a great example. Okay, we also have a whiskey chart for those as well. So special optics is something Panavision has been doing ever since Dan Sasaki was old enough to hold a screwdriver. And he's been kind enough to pass the torch to many of us around the globe. And so 90% of what I do with lenses every day is not off the shelf. Most of them are custom. Do you need custom optics? No, just happens to be something that is heavily part of my job. So I spend a lot of time in there. I also work with a lot of cinematographers that work with stock optics as well. So whatever the look for your film, there's always a solution. If we're missing a lens in, say, a vintage optic, we can take a modern optic, manipulate it to fill the gaps. So when you cut from your 35 vintage to your 40, 2015 lens, you're not going to see a difference. No one's going to see a difference, and you can fill the gap you need, get the close focus you need, and so forth. Or say you need a zoom with a certain amount of coverage, with a certain aperture, with a certain close focus. That didn't exist in 1970 or 1980 with the lenses you're shooting with, but it does exist in modern day. So we take modern zooms and modify them. So I'm going to buzz through this as swiftly as I can so I don't lose time, but we basically have, there's more than 5, but we have 5 recipes we commonly lean on day after day after day. The first one of them is noir. Noir is popular because it adds spherical aberration. So if you look at the picture of Stephanie here, the street lamp in the background is clean on the left, and it has some diffusion. It's got a little bit of haze on the right. Her skin's smoother on the right. As we mentioned before, spherical aberration is one of 2 aberrations that we as humans like to be photographed with. It also survives the compression of streaming content. The second one, astigmatism, that we talked about, that one doesn't survive as well. You have to get really aggressive with it for it to survive. So the subtle brush strokes that we do that you would see on the monitor as like, wow, it's an extra kiss of love to the skin. It ain't going to make it to the living room. It'll make it to DCP, so it'll make it to the theater for sure, but it's not going to make it to the living room. So think more, when we go aggressive, think more like Homecoming with the aggressive fall off in the corners, or Sabrina, the Teenage Witch, with the compression and the stretch in the corners. That's astigmatism manipulated in 2 different ways. And we'll buzz through so you can see the street lamps blooming on the right and not on the left. When you backlight it, you get more of an atmosphere feel to the room. There's no smoke in the room. That's just the noir doing its trick. But there's a clean shot on the bottom right. The rest are our 5 different processes. And they do everything from lift the blacks to increase the flare signature. And they even there's even one that kind of adds everything together and goes a little bit kind of batshit crazy. But the batshit crazy one, it's the only one that will manifest ghosting. So a lot of cinematographers won't necessarily use that for episodic, because episodic, you're kind of racing the clock. But it heavily comes to play in theatrical. And we have the same scenes with street lamp, with Jonathan in focus, with the backlight, and with a full flare, just to show you how they're different. Oh, okay, hold on. So special optics also carries into anamorphic. So every lens can be touched: spherical, anamorphic, Panavision, Zeiss, Cook, Leica. Everything is on the table for us when it comes to manipulation. So if it's something that needs to be done, we've got you covered. This next scene is a scene from Killing Them Softly. Greg Fraser shot it. Greg Fraser used these lenses twice in his career. He used them for Killing Them Softly in a few scenes, and he also used them for Snow White and the Huntsman. This is a heavily altered anamorphic. The background is more askew and just more oblique than you're ever going to see. But what's in focus is nice and tack sharp. Oh, really? Sorry. Why is it kicking me out? Yeah. What? Well, I'm missing like the next 4 slides for some reason. What happened to my presentation? Oh shit. That's not good. What happened to it? I apologize, guys. Yeah, I've got a couple more slides of footage to see. So anyways, I apologize for that. I'm going to take my thing off screen share. But I will talk about what the last, okay, are we back on just
Yeah, yes.
faces now? All right. So the second thing I was going to show you, which was one of the last things, is it's a scene from a Amazon streaming content called Too Old to Die Young. It was shot by Darius Kanji. And he fell in love with a vintage set of our lenses called P Vintage. P Vintage is rehoused Panavision ultra speeds and super speeds from the 70s. So the optical performance is the same from the 60s and the 70s, sorry, 70s as it is today. But the mechanics were updated to like late 2000s to be more user-friendly for the camera assistants. But he wanted that customized. So we brought them way down. We lifted the blacks, we lowered contrast, we heavily increased, spherical aberration. And then he wanted to take Primos, which is, a 20 or newer lens. And he wanted the Primos to match the look of the custom P Vintage, which we did. The reason he did that is because he knew he was going to be having nighttime exterior scenes with reflections and the threat of ghosting he didn't want to deal with. And I had a really good scene to show you that I don't have right now, because it had both lenses in the same shot.
What's the
so
movie,
annoying.
Guy? We'll have to just go watch the whole
It's
thing.
an episodic, Too Old to Die Young. So if
Too Old to Die.
you watch it, what you want to look for is you want to look at your bokeh, look at your specular highlights, and when they're out of focus, if it's the vintage optic and you have a high contrast scene like all these nighttime scenes with the police running around, you'll see the chromatic aberration around the neon signs, around the stop signs, stop the street lights and so forth. When they jump to the Primo, that's gone. You'll have a clean bokeh with no red or green pinstripe. And then some of the scenes you'll see in the bokeh, you'll have like a white pinstripe around the bokeh. That's a certain form of spherical aberration. And that's something that only specific vintage optics do. Actually, I have a scene I can show you that real quick. Hold on.
And if you do watch Too Old to Die Young, you'll also see some of colorist Ian Verdevec's best work.
Well done,
Okay.
Paul. Good plug.
So let me.
This is a light
I
iron
can
colorist, I guess. It was that close.
Come on. Here we go. All right. So if you look at this bokeh here, see how this has the chromatic aberration. It's got the green fringe, but you see this like white pinstripe following the edge of the bokeh. Okay. That is over corrected spherical aberration. It's something only a small handful of lenses do. It's something you'll see in that as well. So when you're diagnosing lenses and trying to see what someone shot on, you can commonly tell more by looking at the lenses out of focus images and the in focus images. So when I'm asked to like, hey, what do these guys shoot on? I'll look at IMDb, and half the time it's wrong because our competitors like to go in there and delete our stuff and write their own stuff in because it's not managed. And so I'll watch the project, and you can usually tell by the out of focus images, by the shape of the bokeh, how much field illumination there is, chromatic aberration, all that stuff. What did they shoot with? So we can help that cinematographer, you guys, get something to fill the look that you're going for. So if we work together on a project of any kind, any image you can send me, any video you can give me homework to watch as to what you're going for, even if you're like saying, I want this, but I want to lift the blacks more, I want to soften this and do that. That really helps me kind of steer you towards what it is I'd suggest you use.
Gentlemen,
and that's it for me.
My reaction, I went to film school a whole bunch of years ago. I didn't learn any of this. Do you think, Guy and Paul, that are they teaching some of this in film school?
Last time I went to film school, I was lucky enough when I got hired at Panavision, they sent me to 2 semesters at UCLA. And there are things they don't teach, or they teach incorrectly, and they don't like it when somebody raises their hand and points it out. I learned that the hard way. But my boss was like, you got to say something because they're not supposed to say that. Like, you're supposed to say this. And so I had a little sidebar with the teacher, and he didn't like it very much. So I don't know. I don't know what they're teaching today. I do know that like there are cinematographers we work with, like I know Jeremy Prasant and Steve Yudlin, who are both UCLA grads that we've worked with since they were film students, are now A-list ASCs.
Sure.
They volunteer their time and they teach classes at AFI. So I can guarantee they're very by the rules. So I can guarantee they're not leaving anything out in their dictations. So
Right.
so hopefully we're on a better path than we were back in 1997 when I went.
And Paul, the stuff that you're doing there at is also very complicated, very precise, very exhausting. Do guys, indie producers, indie filmmakers coming up, do you need to do a lot of coaching and hand holding to get them into your workflows and what they're doing and addressing some of the things you discussed?
Yeah, I mean, I do a version of this for film schools, maybe once a month or so. So it isn't necessarily something that gets out there. Here's what I will say. If you are a good producer, you will know what you don't know. And you will find someone who does, and you will ask them the question, right? Like, I will sit down and spend an hour talking to somebody and telling them all of the things to look for and all of that stuff any day of the week, because ultimately it benefits me. Because when you bring me something, I'm not going to have to go back to you and say, hey, listen, thanks. Here are the 50 things that are wrong with this that you're going to have to now go fix before I can do anything with it. So ask the questions. And, you guys, and you should get a copy of the presentation. If you don't, let me know. My email's in there. Ask the question always. Like, don't
we definitely will do that. This has been such an amazing tutorial, and also Aaron, on your end as well. Paul, a quick question to you. One of the things that you want to get out there is that I think in some of on your website and other literature, you're a company without borders. You provide services without borders on a global basis. Yet I'm wondering, how significantly did COVID interrupt that, and how, without getting into it, does war in the Ukraine affect Panavision's attempt to provide global services without borders?
I mean, the tragedy that's happening in Ukraine notwithstanding, what we learned most during the COVID time was that we're a lot more flexible than we think we are, right? Film changes on a glacial pace until there's one event that forces everybody to do it. So the transition from film and video to digital was going like this until the tsunami in Japan happened and nobody could get HD cam SR tape anymore. And the second that happened, everyone was like, oh, digital delivery is great. Let's have a ProRes movie. And then suddenly it was fine, right? And so I say that to say, up until 2019, you had to have your butt in a dark room looking at the same screen to know what your colorist was doing and what you were doing. What COVID allowed us to do was take that out. So I could do it from here in Mammoth, or you could do it from there in Scottsdale, or where you are in Arizona. We could look at the same image and collaborate pretty much anywhere in the world. That's great. It doesn't replace sitting in the same room and feeling the energy and feeling that moment where you do something and the director goes, but you can feel it. Like, that human interaction and that energy is still crucial to the process. But we're just able to free people up. So a post supervisor who doesn't want to drive from Santa Monica to Hollywood can stay in Santa Monica. That's fine. So anyway, that's a very long-winded way to say we learned a lot throughout this entire experience. And what we learned is that we can do a lot of these processes in ways we didn't think we were able to even 2 years ago.
Understood. Aaron, a question for you. I've been reading, some press releases and things coming out of Hollywood recently about your partnership with Disney and one of their new programs, Launchpad for Disney Plus. Is that something that you've been involved in? And if so, could you tell us a little bit about that? It sounds very interesting.
I've only been peripherally involved with that. That actually is something that came through our brand marketing team. So I work in concert with brand marketing. Brand marketing is the team that, as you probably know, John, they're actually the ones that deal with partnerships and sponsorships. So like with the film festival here and other festivals that we support, they're the ones that make kind of those decisions. So they made that partnership with Disney. And where I would come into any of those initiatives is if they have an educational component to it, or if we're providing equipment, then I would certainly work with them to kind of be the boots on the ground and work with the filmmakers in that regard. So kind of like I take over where the grant would normally, as I said, the grant program normally brings in applications. Sometimes they come in through sponsorships of festivals. If someone wins a prize at a festival that Panavision sponsors, they'll come through me ultimately to cash that prize in. So I do know of that program. I met some of the filmmakers the first year. They were fantastic, and it's a great opportunity. Any of those opportunities to, again, reach out to the community of aspiring filmmakers is something I love to do. I'm happy to do.
Absolutely. Here's a question for you guys. Does Panavision and or Light Iron have an internship program?
I can take that one. I get that question a lot. The answer is yes. In theory, we do. Since COVID, we have not. So you're welcome. Again, nfp@panavision.com is your open door into Panavision whenever you have questions. If anyone wants to follow up with me about that, my answer right now is simply going to be, I'm happy to connect you with the people in HR who normally run our internship program. There is a separate internship program through our headquarters where we all work in, where Guy and I work in Woodland Hills. And then there's also a program through Hollywood. It's called the 2-year program, which is fantastic for anybody who's really interested in getting their hands on cameras. Unfortunately, like I said, at this moment, both are still on hold, but I certainly hope that will change soon.
Understood. And a question also from the audience. I heard that Panavision acquired the original patents from Fox's CinemaScope. Is that true?
It's definitely a Guy question.
I would be able to say, I mean, I don't know. And if we did, we don't use them because we have our own anamorphic patent. There's not too much in the anamorphic world outside of what we do that's patent protected. There's a few things that Vantage have done, but yet there's a bunch of people copying Vantage and getting away with it. Like Atlas is almost a direct copy of the Vantage integrated anamorphosis. And there's a ton of people out there, which is basically just a modern, sexy spin on a Crystal Express. So I'd have to check. I don't know, but if, like I said, if we do, we don't use it. We have our own little secret sauce.
Understood. Paul, how soon should a producer, a filmmaker, start talking to a colorist at Light Iron?
That's a great question. Before you shoot anything, for sure. Once your DP is on, because that's another big thing. So once you have a director, once your director of photography is coming on, because he or she is going to have a very strong opinion about all of this stuff. So I would say in terms of colorists, that's a creative conversation, right? That's like, what do we want the thing to feel like? We want it to smell like purple. In terms of when should a producer like reach out to someone like me? I mean, when you're putting your budget together, right? Because I can tell you, like, listen, here are the numbers you should put in your budget. Whether you can get these or not is another question entirely, but here's what you should be budgeting for what you want to do down the road. So I'm not exactly answering the question. I would say with a colorist, after the DP is in place, before you shoot everything, when you're planning, as early as you can to get the right numbers.
And the DIT phenomenon, is that growing? The digital imaging technologist on set, offset, is that, you see more of that? Is that a valuable development?
The DIT has been around for a long time. Is it growing or shrinking? I think it's probably maintaining. I think everyone's grown accustomed to having them on set. They do a lot of amazing work. Is it absolutely necessary? No, of course not. But does it add something? I would say yeah, because you're able to sort of dial in color on the set in a very specific way that we can then take after the fact and process into the dailies to get back to editorial. So, there's lots of different iterations about what that particular job does, whether it's data management or color or what. Bigger shows will have multiple people doing the same thing, but I would say on the whole, 8 shows out of 10 that we do have a DIT of some flavor, maybe 9. It's pretty ubiquitous at this point.
Gentlemen, I am most impressed with the conversation today. I have taken notes furiously. My mind is racing with many, many ideas. You've been absolutely great and wonderful at sharing your expertise and knowledge. I'd like to ask a final question to Guy to kind of close us out. Actually, I'm going to ask 2 questions, but this is to Guy, and then I'll ask a final one to all of you. Guy, I'm fresh out of graduate school. I'm an independent filmmaker. I think I got something going. I'm kind of inexperienced. How do younger filmmakers work with Panavision?
Um, give us a call. I mean, I grew up in the Hollywood office. I spent 25 years working out of the Panavision Hollywood office, and I moved over here about a year and a half ago. And I've spent the majority of my career working with as many emerging and student films as I have with everyday household names. So everybody's just as important to us. And no, like Paul mentioned before, ask questions. Like what we both talked about, there isn't a book in the world you can grab and read and just study. And if you did, it's so math heavy, you're going to want to kill yourself. So it's a collection of like my mentors and reading and studying and watching, multiple films and shooting tests that have given, like, the collective knowledge I've gained is from that. And it's really a lot of fun to share that with emerging cinematographers. And they have the best questions. Like half of the crazy SHIT that, like, just me, not talking about Dan, just half the shit that I've put together comes from DPs. Like, we don't just wake up one day and go, let's do something and call it noir. No, like, somebody came to us and said, hey, can you do this? And we're like, I think I can do that. And so we run in the back, and that's how it happens. So keep asking, keep pushing us, keep dreaming up the impossible, because it's not impossible.
Well, when you said, after all of this beautiful historical overview of Panavision and its lens development and so forth, and these iconic optics and lenses, for you to say that something like 90% of what you do is off the shelf, you just kind of wing it. Somebody comes in and says, yeah, this is great, but here's what I want to do. I mean, it's just holy moly. Yeah. Okay, a final question, starting with Aaron. We've got to wrap it up. Thank you so much again. But gentlemen, take the high road here now. Give us the usual closer on such sessions like this. What's your final advice to young filmmakers coming up? They got a solid story. They think they've got talent. They don't have a lot of experience, but they want to get into the business. What's your advice for your younger filmmakers?
Oh gosh, well, I have a lot of advice to give to young filmmakers, but it's easy for me because I run the new filmmaker program. And so, I would say that is what I'm here for. I'm here to be, as I said, that open door and that bridge into Panavision. So I would say, give me a call, send me an email, nfp@panavision.com. Let's start a conversation, come in, we'll have a coffee, we'll talk about it all. I can vouch for everything that Guy said. I mean, Guy is so amazing with all of the student and young filmmakers and independent filmmakers that come in. Even if they're getting a free camera from me from a grant, it makes no difference to Guy, the way he comes in and the attention and the expertise and the passion with which he brings to them. He'll come and he'll make time whenever he can. It's amazing. He'll come off of he literally just left some, $50 million, $100 million movie with some huge name DP, and comes in and is still doing the same thing with my DPs and everything. So we have, budget is a real thing. We can't always give you a free camera, but we always want to be having that conversation with you. So just email us and come on in.
Thank you so much. Paul, what's your advice?
Get into real estate.
Hey, we're pulling no punches here at this film festival. We're telling it like it is.
I'm only half joking. Like I said earlier, like, don't be afraid to ask the questions. Don't be afraid to reach out, send an email, make a phone call, because the worst you're going to end up is in the same place. And if you give any one of the three people on this, or four, I'm sorry, John, but if you give any of us a call or an email, you're going to get an answer of some sort. Like Aaron said, budget's always a factor, and we may not be able to just give you something. And honestly, if we just gave you something, it would have as much value as you paid for it, right? And so don't ever ask for anything for free. Be willing to give something. And I'm telling you, like, doors will open and rivers will part, so long as people, like, this is all I have. What can we do? And there's almost always a solution.
So beautifully said. Guy, take us out. Take us home. What's your advice?
Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to walk in the doors and say, hi, I'm so-and-so. I don't know what I'm doing. Like, there's no stupid questions. I learned bugging the bejeebas out of my boss, who was happy to share. And, you know, my mentors like Sasaki and Almeyer Senior and Junior, like you just, who are like some of the founding engineers, like you just ask questions and they're going to share, you know, like so please ask, reach out, email us. We'll get back to you, like Paul said, and come on in, say hi and introduce yourself. And if we have a few minutes, we'll take you around the corner and we'll show you a couple of things and get your wheels turning. So
I hope the people out there listening take this seriously. Panavision is a wonderful company. We've all started at the same place, which is pretty low on that total, on that ladder. You know, you got to work your way up, and there are always people above who are willing to help. And the Panavision guys and gals are part of that crew. Gentlemen, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I wish you all the success. And thank you so much for adding so much value to our film festival today. And let's definitely stay in touch. And Paul, I'm going to be sending you an email for that tutorial. Fascinating, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
welcome.
Having
Thank
us.
you.
Yes.
Bye, guys.